what I'd like to talk a little bit about is what's been going on in the United States in terms of hybrid business structures. For the last few years, there's been a fair amount of discussion and thought going into exactly how to structure business relationships in a way that marries philanthropic or governmental capital funds with private sector funds in a way that allows socially beneficial outcomes and outcomes that leverage the otherwise finite resources of the governmental and philanthropic sectors. And the way I began thinking about it was in the context of how to marry the two sources of capital, how to deal with the fact that that many efforts at philanthropy, at achieving a socially useful goal fail because of lack of capital. They don't fail because of a lack of ideas. And the Tällberg Forum is a good example of how many ideas there are for accomplishing good that abound. The real question is how do you bring them into fruition? How do you make them sustainable? And to do that in the most efficient way, you really need to think of a way to get beyond what some have called a pre-capitalist philosophy. That is, the king simply giving out money to the peasants that work the land around the castle. And that's sort of the way philanthropy occurs now. The philanthropists give grants and hope for the best. The grant is a finite amount of money. It may be enough to accomplish the socially desirable end or not, but the point is it's a finite amount. It has an end, and once you get to the end of that particular grant, you have to do something else. So the idea was to come up with a way to leverage that finite amount of money together with the techniques in the capital markets for ongoing financing, equity participation, for example, concept of stock ownership. And so the idea that occurred to me a couple of years ago was to take a particular business structure called the limited liability company in the United States. And in the United States, a limited liability company has the ability to be treated as a partnership, as a so-called pass-through entity, where instead of the entity bearing the brunt of taxation and loss, those profits and losses are passed through to the owners as if they were doing something directly. But it has the benefits of liability protection and ongoing life. So I took the concept of a limited liability company and inserted into what would normally be the purpose statement of the enterprise, that is to conduct a business to maximize return to the owners as the primary purpose. I inserted as the primary purpose a purpose that is charitable or socially beneficial, a shorthand way of describing the concept of charity. That would be the primary purpose. The secondary purpose is to maximize return to the owners. So what that does effectively is set the stage for what would be the business judgment executed by the managers, the directors of the limited liability company. I named this new organization Low Profit Limited Liability Company, and drafted the first legislation that was enacted into law in Vermont and now is law in 8 states, and as Stephen mentioned, 2 American Indian tribal nations. This low-profit limited liability company, as I say, because of the way the purposes are structured with 2 tiers of purposes, the first being the socially beneficial purpose, the second being return to investors. It structures the fiduciary responsibilities of the directors in a way that points them to making decisions first based on what the outcome is going to be for the socially beneficial goal, secondarily for the business purpose. So it kind of reverses the hierarchy that exists now in many enterprises where the purpose is to generate revenue for the owners, and then after the revenue has been received, the owners may decide to give some away for a socially beneficial cause. It simply flips those directives. So far, there's been a lot of interest, particularly at the level of obtaining authorizing statutes, and there's some exploration of actual enterprises that's beginning to happen. But it's very interesting to see how people struggle with the terminology that they're familiar with: philanthropy, social benefit, private enterprise, and flipping those around and putting them in different orders, something like an anagram, has an interesting psychological effect on people. At first they don't understand, but then after they think about it a bit, a light goes on, their eyes begin to gleam, and they begin to think of ways to marry the worlds of philanthropy and governmental money with the financing techniques of the private sector for a better outcome for everyone.
Reminds me.
I'm a lawyer. I'm a tax lawyer in the United States, and in the United States, the tax law is the legal mechanism for governing charities, for structuring philanthropy in the United States. For 25 years, I was a lawyer for the U.S. Internal Revenue Service in the part of the IRS that oversees charities and other nonprofits. In fact, for the last 10 years, from 1990 until 2000, I was the head of that particular component of the Internal Revenue Service. I spent now over 35 years thinking about these issues, and eventually my feeble brain put the thoughts together into something that has some practical use, I think, and is a concept that, while the pieces have been there, no one seems to have put them together in quite the same way before. There certainly is interest. At different times, places as disparate as Singapore and here in Europe, the Middle East, there's been interest in this idea of coming up with a structure that allows for a sustainable philanthropy, a sustainable success rate with a socially beneficial entity. And so I think that if some of the ideas that are generated at places here like Tallberg are put into this sort of structure, or perhaps the SELLP in the UK, or a community interest company, I think there's a chance that if they're successful, it really will serve as a model. It's one thing for lawyers like myself and Stephen to stand up and come up with a legal concept. It's quite another to then take it to market and actually be successful at achieving the socially beneficial enterprise. And while Stephen and I can set it up, what we need are the social entrepreneurs here at Tallberg to take it the rest of the way. And I think there are plenty of creative people here who are focused on exactly that.